Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely wild, high-stakes saga of the US dollar's ruthless ascent to global hegemony. We're going to trace exactly how the dollar transformed from a totally fragmented, chaotic local tender into an undeniable global monopoly. It's a story packed with war, economic crashes, strategic masterstrokes, and unprecedented power. Let's get into it. All right, let's jump right in with a mind-blowing number from the year 1860, 10,000. And no, that wasn't the number of banks in the country or the amount of national debt. That was the staggering number of different kinds of dollars floating around in circulation at the exact same time. See, for the first half of the 19th century, there was no nationwide currency. None. It wasn't one unified financial system backed by a central government. It was just this chaotic free-for-all of completely different bills. If you were an average citizen back then, it was almost impossible to know which of these random pieces of paper actually held any real value. So the obvious question is, how on earth did this completely chaotic system of 10,000 private currencies manage to become the ultimate global superpower? We're going to trace exactly how the dollar survived that mess to monopolize the modern world. Because the system they were operating under back then, yeah, it was completely unsustainable. Section 1. The Wild West of Money, 19th Century Chaos. To really grasp the dollar's dominance today, you have to understand just how absurd the early American economy actually was. It truly was the Wild West. Imagine trying to do business. You walk into a store in Philadelphia, hand over a note from Tennessee, and the storekeeper might tell you it's only worth 50 cents on the dollar because he simply doesn't trust the bank. And counterfeiters? They didn't even bother forging existing bills. There were so many random currencies out there, they just made up completely fake banks and printed their own money. I mean, who was actually printing this money? Well, everyone. Everyone from the local hotel owner down the street to massive railroad companies was printing their own dollars. It's literally like if your local grocery store suddenly started paying you in its own custom cash. The result was hundreds of thousands of unmanageable, highly questionable denominations. Every transaction was a negotiation, and every purchase was a potential scam. The entire system was completely out of control. Part 2. Lincoln's War Machine, Funding the Civil War. The turning point hit when the brutal realities of the Civil War basically forced the government to centralize power. With soldiers to pay and a massive war effort to fund, the Union just couldn't rely on 10,000 random pieces of paper. President Abraham Lincoln had to strip the money printing power from the masses. So in 1863, the federal government issued the Greenback. They literally used patented green ink on the back of the bills because that specific shade was completely impossible for counterfeiters to reproduce using the photographic methods they had at the time. Lincoln created a single, believable standard. And the impact was immediate and dramatic. In just a few short years, the Wild West of money got totally reorganized. By 1866, that absurd chaos of 10,000 currencies was crushed down to a singular, recognizable brand overseen by the government. The dollar, as a unified national concept, had finally arrived. Chapter 3. The Great Global Collapse. The gold standard fails. Fast forward a few decades, and this system faced a completely different threat. As the US became the world's largest economy, tying this powerful currency to gold essentially created a ticking time bomb. The rules of the gold standard meant the government was legally supposed to hold enough gold to back every printed dollar. But during the booming 1920s, they kept the money machine running, printing way more dollars than they actually had gold for, which fueled a massive speculative stock bubble. When that bubble violently burst on Black Thursday in October 1929, terrified citizens rushed to their local banks, demanding the gold they were legally promised. But because the gold simply wasn't there, the banks failed, plunging the entire world into the Great Depression. The inflexibility of the gold standard proved totally disastrous during a panic. Section 4. The Ultimate Plot Twist. The 1971 Nixon Shock. Following World War II, global finance was reorganized, crowning the US dollar as the world's central currency. But by 1971, this system was teetering on the brink of total collapse again. Here's exactly how it unfolded. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement tied the global economy to the dollar, and the dollar to gold at 35 bucks an ounce. But in the 1960s, the US began running massive deficits, printing billions to fund the Vietnam War and buy up foreign investments. European nations, notably France and Germany, saw the writing on the wall. They realized America was printing money it couldn't back, so they aggressively started cashing in their dollars for actual US gold. To stop the bleeding, in August 1971, President Nixon shocked the world. He unilaterally broke the rules of the global financial system, completely severing the dollar's tie to gold and turning it into a floating currency literally overnight. It is honestly staggering to realize just how close to the edge they were before Nixon pulled the plug. Back in 1944, the US had essentially 100% gold coverage. By 1971, they had printed so much excess money that they barely had 20% coverage. Think about that. If Nixon hadn't acted and all those foreign central banks demanded their gold at once, it would have been the 1929 bank run all over again, but on a massive global scale. It would have triggered an absolute calamity. So the dollar gets untethered from gold and becomes this wildly fluctuating roller coaster on the open market. And America's attitude? Uncompromising. Nixon's Treasury Secretary John Connally looked at frustrated European allies and famously said, "The dollar is our currency, but your problem." That unapologetic quote perfectly captures the swaggering, newly militarized posture of American economic policy. They were managing the currency for American interests, and the rest of the world? Well, they just had to deal with the fallout. Section 5. The Oil Monopoly. Birth of the Petrodollar. This all raises a massive question. If gold no longer gave the dollar its value and it was now just a piece of paper backed by faith, how on earth did it maintain its inescapable grip on the modern world? The answer is the petrodollar. Going back to an incredibly consequential meeting in 1945 aboard an American warship, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Saudi King Ibn Saud struck a deal. In exchange for American military protection of the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exclusively in US dollars. It was a strategic masterstroke. It ensured that every single nation on Earth, regardless of how they felt about America, needed US dollars to buy their basic, vital energy resources. The scale of this shift is absolutely astounding. When we measure the physical cash today, there are over $777 billion in circulation. But get this, well over half of that, roughly $512 billion, circulates completely outside of US borders. And crucially, a full 25% of all dollars on the planet are held by the oil-rich monarchies of the Persian Gulf. This isn't just domestic money anymore. This is an undeniable, tightly woven global monopoly anchored by the world's thirst for oil. Take a second and think about a dollar bill in your wallet right now. It represents just 30% of the total physical supply. An incredible 70% is held by foreigners, central banks, massive investment funds, and regular people around the world using it as a safe store of value. This massive foreign ownership heavily anchors the entire global economy squarely to American interests. And despite immense turbulence over the decades, and despite the rise of new rivals like the euro, the architects of this system remain incredibly confident. Giants of finance like Paul Volcker, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, who famously crushed the rampant inflation of the 1980s, have conceded that while a true neutral world currency might be ideal one day, the US dollar's reign isn't ending anytime soon. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. From 10,000 chaotic random notes to the undisputed king of global finance, the dollar's journey really is a masterclass in power and leverage. Every single time you hold or spend a dollar, you are actively participating in a sprawling financial empire. But as history shows us with the gold standard and the global crashes of the past, the rules of money can change overnight. So how long can any empire truly last? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.